Why does God bless others and not me? The question had no voice. It was never spoken aloud, not in prayer, not in conversation, not even in the privacy of his own car on the long drive home from church. But it lived inside Marcus Green like a splinter buried too deep to see, pressing against something tender every time he checked his bank account, every time the transmission went out on the truck he had been trying to pay off for 3 years. Every time he smiled and nodded when the pastor talked about abundance as though it were a promise Marcus had somehow lost the receipt for. He was 38 years old. He lived in Clarksville, Tennessee, in a house that was mostly his, and a life that was mostly good. He had faith, real faith, the kind that gets out of bed on cold Sunday mornings and sits in the third row and means every word. He tithed. He had tithed even the year his hours got cut at the plant. Even the month his mother got sick and the hospital bills arrived 2 at a time. He served in the food pantry on the second Saturday of every month, stacking canned goods with careful hands and a genuine smile. He prayed every morning without fail, before the coffee finished brewing, on his knees on the kitchen floor. And still, the money came in and vanished like water through cracked hands. He could never quite say where it went. There was always something: the water heater, the medical bill, the car, the roof, the thing after the thing after the thing. He had learned to live with a particular tightness in his chest that he could not fully name. Not poverty exactly, not desperation, something quieter and more stubborn than either. The feeling of running on a road that never ends, of working and praying and serving and somehow, inexplicably, never arriving anywhere different than where he started. He told himself it was a season. He told himself God was testing him. He told himself some people were simply called to live simply, and maybe he was one of them. He had been telling himself these things for 11 years. The mission trip to Oaxaca was not his idea. It was Pastor Ray who suggested it during a Wednesday evening meeting. 2 weeks with a small team to help rebuild a community center in a village outside the city. Marcus almost said no. He had vacation days saved, but he had plans for those days. Practical plans involving the gutters on the back of the house and the garden his wife had asked him to fix since spring. In the end, what changed his mind was something small and unannounced. A Sunday morning when the light came through the sanctuary windows at a particular angle, and the choir sang a line from an old hymn that pressed directly on the splinter inside his chest and made his eyes sting without warning. He signed up before he could talk himself out of it. The drive from Oaxaca City into the mountains took 2 hours on roads that belonged to a different century. The van swayed through switchbacks and dry hillside and small villages with painted walls and dogs sleeping in the dust. Marcus sat by the window and watched the landscape move past, arid, golden, immense, stripped of everything unnecessary, and felt something he could not yet identify beginning to loosen in a place he had stopped paying attention to. They were welcomed into the village with a meal prepared by women who had nothing, by any measurement Marcus knew how to apply, and who served it like a sacrament. Black beans and rice and hand-pressed tortillas and a soup that tasted like something his grandmother might have made on a Sunday. The women smiled as they served, refilling bowls without being asked, pressing more food into hands that said they had enough. There was a quality to their generosity that unsettled him in a way he could not immediately explain. It did not feel like sacrifice. It felt like overflow. That first evening, he sat outside on an overturned crate while the sun went down behind the mountains and watched a man named Rodrigo play a battered guitar for his children. The children danced barefoot in the dust, laughing at nothing in particular, laughing because the evening was warm and their father was playing, and that was reason enough. Rodrigo's wife brought out a single candle and set it between them and sat down and watched her children with a look on her face that Marcus had no word for. Not happiness exactly. Something older and more settled than happiness. Something that looked, from where he sat in the fading light, very much like peace. He stayed with the feeling for a long time before he allowed himself to look at it directly. These people had less than he had ever had. The house behind Rodrigo was smaller than Marcus's garage. There was no savings account, no retirement fund, no gutters to fix or car payments to manage. And yet something radiated from that family in the candlelight. Some quality of ease and sufficiency, and even, he thought, abundance, that Marcus realized he had been quietly starving for without ever knowing its name. He had prayed for more money. He had never once prayed for that. He went to bed that night with ancient words moving through him unbidden. They have sown much and harvested little. They eat but never have enough. They drink but never have their fill. He who earns wages does so to put them into a bag with holes. He lay in the dark a long time, and for the first time in years he asked a question without preparing the answer. What am I carrying that I don't know I'm carrying? It was on the fourth day that he found himself sitting across from Rodrigo during a break in the work, two men sharing a bottle of water in the shade of a half-built wall. Rodrigo spoke careful English, choosing his words like a man who understood their weight. They had been exchanging sentences slowly over the past few days, the way men learn to trust a new bridge, one careful step at a time. Marcus asked something he had not planned to ask. He asked how Rodrigo stayed at peace. Rodrigo was quiet for a long moment. He looked out at the mountains the way a man looks at something familiar and still beautiful. My father, he said finally, always told me, if God is watching, worry is already a sin. But I think, he paused, turning the thought carefully, it is more than worry. It is what you believe about yourself, deep inside. When a man believes he is not enough, nothing ever becomes enough. When a man believes he deserves nothing, he opened his hands slowly and let them fall, palms up, empty. Even blessings pass right through. Marcus looked at him. My father also said, Rodrigo continued almost to himself, the poor man who believes he is poor will always be poor, even when money comes. That night, Marcus sat alone outside with a flashlight and his worn Bible, and found the words in Proverbs that he had read 100 times without ever truly hearing them. For as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. He read it again, and a third time slowly, the way you read something when you finally suspect it was written for you. He thought about the tightness in his chest that had lived there for 11 years. He thought about every time he had said, almost reflexively, I don't know where the money goes. Every time he had thought, without examining the thought, maybe I'm just not the kind of person who gets ahead. Every time he had looked at someone else's blessing and felt not faith, but a dull, accepted distance, as if abundance were a country whose border he had been quietly, permanently barred from crossing. He had called it humility. He had called it contentment. He had called it accepting God's will. But sitting in the dust of Oaxaca with the mountains dark against the stars, Marcus Green began to understand that what he had been calling faith might be something else entirely. A script, a story inherited so young he had never thought to examine it, a hole in the bag that he had never seen, not because it was not there, but because no one had ever told him the hole was not supposed to be there. He had assumed the leaking was simply the condition of the bag. He wept. Not dramatically, just the slow, quiet weeping that happens when something that has been carried for a very long time is finally, carefully set down. He did not come home from Oaxaca with more money. The gutters still needed fixing. The car still needed attention. Nothing in the external world had changed by any measurable amount. But something had shifted in the place where the splinter used to be. He began to notice the voice, the one he had never identified as separate from himself. Not dramatic, not loud, just the constant ambient narration beneath every financial decision. There will not be enough. You always end up back here. Every time you get ahead, something takes it away. People like you don't build wealth. He heard it now the way you hear a sound in the walls once someone points it out. Suddenly everywhere, undeniable, and no longer mistaken for silence. And he began, slowly and imperfectly, to answer it, not with declarations spoken loudly at an altar, with something quieter and more sustained. With the decision, made again each morning on the kitchen floor, to open his hands rather than grip them, to bring his request before God not from a posture of scarcity, but from a posture of trust, to believe, not as doctrine performed on Sundays, but as a daily lived practice, that the God who made him was not withholding from him out of judgment, but waiting for him to stop agreeing with the lie he had inherited. The words of Paul, which he had memorized years ago and recited like furniture, began to carry actual weight. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The renewing of the mind, not the bank account, not the circumstances first. The mind, the deep interior place where the bag was made, where its shape was determined, where the holes were cut or sealed. This was where the work was. This was where it had always been waiting for him. If you have ever worked faithfully, prayed sincerely, given generously, and still watched the money slip away like it was never truly yours. If you have ever swallowed the quiet thought that perhaps blessing is simply for other people, that perhaps something in you is not built for abundance, then perhaps the most important next step is not to pray more, or give more, or find a better budget. Perhaps it is to ask the question Marcus learned to ask in the dust of a Mexican village under an enormous sky. What have I believed about myself that God never said? The transformation is real. The renewing is possible. And the God who formed you did not form you to carry a bag with holes for the rest of your life. The day is coming, it has already begun, when what you believe in the deep and quiet places will finally agree with what He declared over you before you drew your first breath. And when that day arrives, you will look back and wonder how you ever mistook the prison for a calling.